there was a time when he didn't know who he was, when he looked in the mirror and saw a version of himself shaped by what others thought, what others needed, what others demanded. He became who they wanted him to be. Quiet when they needed silence, strong when they needed support, forgiving when they didn't deserve it, loyal even when his soul was bleeding. He gave without limits because he thought that's what love looked like. He broke himself to build others because he thought that's what strength meant. But in the process, he forgot something. He forgot that he was a man too. He forgot that his heart mattered too. He forgot that worth isn't measured by how much pain you can carry for others. It's measured by how much truth you're willing to carry for yourself. They thought they could break him, and for a while they did. They bent his spirit with manipulation, with silence, with distance. They took his loyalty and weaponized it. They took his kindness and called it weakness. They left him when he needed them the most, and watched without flinching as he tried to hold himself together with shaking hands. They thought he wouldn't survive without them. They thought he'd crawl back, apologize for hurting when he was the one who was wounded. They thought he'd keep shrinking himself just to fit their comfort. And for a while, he did. Because when a man hasn't realized his worth, he'll bleed himself dry just to keep people who'd never do the same. He stayed longer than he should have, in places that drained him, in relationships that only took, in environments that silenced him because he thought maybe if he'd just tried a little harder, loved a little louder, gave a little more, then maybe they'd see his heart. Maybe they'd finally choose him. But they never did. And that's what broke him. Not the loneliness, not the betrayal, not even the loss. What broke him was the realization that the people he would have died for wouldn't even fight for him, that his presence was only valued when it was useful, that his silence was taken as weakness, and his love was seen as convenience. But what they didn't know, what even he didn't know yet, was that brokenness has a strange way of waking a man up. Because once he hit the bottom, once the tears ran dry, and the silence got too loud, he started hearing something else. Not their voices, not their opinions, not their absence. He heard his own voice, whispering from deep inside, whispering, "You were never meant to beg for love. You were never meant to shrink for approval. You were never meant to hurt in silence just to keep the peace." And for the first time in years, he listened. It didn't happen all at once. There was no explosion, no dramatic rebirth, just quiet moments of choosing himself, small acts of rebellion, like saying no, like walking away, like not answering that text, like sitting in his own company and realizing it wasn't loneliness, it was peace. He stopped chasing those who let him go. He stopped explaining himself to people, committed to misunderstanding him. He stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. And in that stillness, he began to remember who he was before the world tried to break him. He remembered that his kindness wasn't weakness, it was power under control. That his loyalty wasn't desperation, it was proof of his integrity. That his silence wasn't empty, it was sacred space for healing. He realized that not everyone deserves access to the deepest parts of him. That his heart is not a public offering, it's a sacred place. And only those who know how to honor it deserve to be near it. He started speaking to himself with the same gentleness he used to give others. He started protecting his energy, like his life depended on it. Because in many ways, it did, and the world noticed. Not immediately, but eventually they noticed. They noticed that he walked differently, that he no longer carried the weight of their expectations on his back, that his eyes no longer searched for approval, but looked straight through their masks and into their intentions. They noticed that he wasn't available like he used to be, not because he didn't care, but because he finally cared enough about himself to stop overextending. For those who wouldn't even stretch for him, they noticed that the man who once gave without asking now had boundaries carved in steel, and suddenly they didn't know how to reach him anymore. They tried to return when they saw his glow, but he wasn't waiting anymore. He had outgrown the version of himself that needed their validation. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need to prove them wrong. He just needed to prove himself right, and he did by healing, by growing, by becoming the man they never expected him to become. They thought they broke him, but they only cracked the shell that was hiding his truth. They thought they left him in darkness, but they actually gave him a reason to search for his own light. And when he found it, nothing and no one could dim it again. He now wakes up with purpose, not to chase people, but to build himself. He walks alone sometimes, but never feels lonely, because his peace has become louder than his need to be understood. He no longer fears being misunderstood, because he understands himself, and that's enough. He no longer fears walking away, because he knows the power of protecting his space. He no longer fears silence, because he knows that's where his strength lives. And he no longer fears love, because he's learned to give it to himself first. This is what happens when a man realizes his worth. He no longer entertains people who try to confuse him. He no longer invests in one-sided relationships. He no longer performs to be accepted, because he knows that his existence is not a performance. It's a truth, and it doesn't need permission to be seen. He becomes dangerous in the best way, not because he seeks to harm, but because he can no longer be manipulated. Not because he's loud, but because his silence no longer hides fear, it hides power. And to the ones who tried to break him, to the ones who mistook his patience for passivity, to the ones who thought they could control him through guilt, silence, or absence, he has only one thing to say: thank you. Because without you, he would have never been pushed this far into himself. He would have never gone this deep into his pain and found his purpose beneath it. He would have never realized that everything he was looking for was always within him, waiting for the moment he stopped looking outside. Now he walks with a calm fire, a quiet confidence, not born of ego, but of resurrection. He's been through the storm, and now he carries it in his chest, not as a burden, but as proof that he survived. He no longer asks for a seat at anyone's table, because he's building his own, and only inviting those who can sit. Without trying to shrink him, he's no longer afraid of being alone, because he knows now solitude is not emptiness. It's preparation, it's clarity, it's where warriors are built. And if you're listening, if you're feeling what he once felt, if you're giving too much to those who give too little, if you're shrinking yourself for people who don't see your value, if you're tired of proving your worth, then maybe it's time you realize something too. Maybe it's time you stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. Maybe it's time you stop breaking for people who won't even bend. Maybe it's time you stop mistaking pain for purpose and finally walk away from what's breaking you, because you are not what they said you are. You are not the version of yourself that you became to survive. You are the fire that still burns beneath the ashes. And when you realize that, when you truly remember who you are, no one can break you again. Not because life won't try, but because you'll never forget your worth again.